In case you haven't figured it out yet, we are in the midst of the collapse. Yes, the big collapse, the one we talk about in the preparedness community all of the time. And if you go back 3 years in time to when we locked down the entire global economy and you really didn't think there was going to be some sort of financial consequences at the end of it, well, you weren't paying attention to how economics worked back in high school, now were you? This is all very predictable. We all saw this coming from a mile away. The ramifications of what happened in 2020 are finally starting to show themselves, and we have been propped up very artificially, somehow miraculously, for the last 3 years to the point where we're finally seeing those effects, right? And we have bank runs starting, we have bank failures occurring. We know this is only going to get worse, and this thing will take time. This collapse is not something that will just happen overnight. These bank runs, these bank failures, and everything else going economically around the world right now aren't something that you'll see happen in a shortened amount of time to where one day everything's fine and the next day everything's suddenly shuttered. That's just not how these things work. If you go back through history, you'll see that all of these types of events take a long period of time. And during that time, things become very uncertain and very difficult. And of course, as preppers, we're concerned about how we're going to get through those times without suffering. That's a huge part of what we try to do in the preparedness community. We want to avoid suffering at all costs, right? For ourselves as well as our families and our loved ones. So, luckily, being a prepper helps hedge you against some of the turmoil that's coming our way. And when I say turmoil, when I say collapse even, I don't only mean economically. We're not just in the economic collapse, right? This is the beginnings of a collapse of the society as we knew it, in the sense of the westernized society, in the sense of how the world functions. A lot of these things are going to change after all of this. It's just how it works. Look how much changed after the Great Depression. A lot of things are different than they were back then, right? So understand that this collapse means societally, it means economically, and it also means that we're going to find ourselves in the midst of a kinetic conventional warfare situation here in the very near future. That's just what's going to happen at this point in time. I feel like that's relatively easy to just say now. Regardless of whether or not you want it to or whether or not you feel like it's going to happen, things are lined up in a certain way where it would be more of a miracle for them to not happen than it would be for them to happen, right? The odds are stacked against us at this point in time. So during this whole collapse scenario and with everything going on, as preppers, the best thing you can do is to keep preparing. And I know that sounds very difficult based on the fact that everybody's struggling financially. It is a difficult thing to do. And understand that I totally understand where you're coming from when you say things like, I can't get any further ahead, or I'm still barely making it now. How am I supposed to do better? And those things are difficult to overcome. That's just part of the human condition at this point in time, thanks to those who are in charge of things like our economy that felt like there wouldn't be any consequences based on what happened during 2020, right? But as a prepper, you also have to be able to adapt to your current environment. And you have to try to see things coming before they do so that you can pivot properly and harden yourself against those challenges that are on their way, right? Now, nothing I'm saying in this video is financial advice because I'm not a financial advisor, so I cannot legally give you financial advice. And I'm not here to give financial advice. Like, that's not the point of this video. What I'm trying to let you know is that although we are in the beginning of this collapse, and that's just my personal thought on it, this is not like some well-researched, topic-driven video where I give you all these data points to show you that there's a good reason to believe that these things are currently what are in existence. What I'm trying to tell you is that this is my gut feeling and my opinion on the matter, and this is how I feel I have done well in the sense of trying to, I guess, diversify my ability to get through these scenarios, not just financially, but in the sense of preparedness as well. So, as preppers, what are we capable of in the sense of dealing with this very difficult scenario that lays ahead? One thing that you can really place your bets on is the fact that you've been prepping. You have hard assets that are things that are valuable no matter what happens in the world. And when I say that, I mean the bare minimum, right? Bare necessities are something that people will always need no matter what the situation. If you have canned goods on hand, if you have food stored away of any kind, and you have access to drinkable, potable water, right? You have a lot more wealth than somebody who has none of those things but has hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank, right? Especially when that bank suddenly shutters and eventually the FDIC can't actually insure all of the money that starts to be lost, correct? So understand that these hard assets we have as preppers help us be wealthy in the sense of being able to survive a situation for the long term. You might not feel rich in the sense of having tons of money or anything like that, but by prepping at the bare minimum, you're already setting yourself up for success in the sense of not needing additional things during those difficult times. And that's a huge thing that you have done for yourself throughout this period of time where you began preparations, right? Now, on the table here, I have some examples of non-food related preps that should hold some value and have different levels of cost involved because all of them provide some form of function and efficiency during a long-term survival situation. And of course, any type of collapse will turn into just that. One of the most dangerous parts of a collapse, like what we're discussing right now, is going to be the desperation that it creates. Understand that desperation drives people to do things they would not usually do. And although we might not personally face some sort of foreign invasion like the people of Ukraine are right now, we may face a very high rise in crime. We're already seeing that happen in our metropolitan areas right now, where crime is running rampant. People are out doing deeds in broad daylight that they would have never been comfortable doing before. And this is only going to get worse the more desperate people become. It's just part of the equation. And of course, as preppers, we have to anticipate that and be prepared to deal with it when it arrives. Okay, so understand that as unfortunate as it is, a lot of times it's members of your community and where you live that are going to be the biggest threat. And I don't know how else to say that, but it is true. So understand that that's a huge part of what we're dealing with. And we also have to deal with the fact that infrastructure is being targeted as well as failing. We have to understand that right now we can't even afford to keep our infrastructure into the position it needs to be in to be efficient and able to be reliable. So we can't afford that now. How are we going to afford that during a full-on economic collapse, right? Understand that all the things that are being kicked down the road in the sense of that proverbial can are eventually going to fall off the road because there's no can left to kick, right? So here's some ideas, just basic stuff. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult, but preps are assets, hard assets that you have in your hand, right? And I'm not saying take all your money out of the bank or anything crazy like that. Like I said, this isn't financial advice or anything. Don't do anything crazy. And of course, getting out of debt is a much better strategy than putting yourself into further debt in order to have more preps and more hard assets, because that ratio doesn't balance very well in the end. In general, it doesn't. The only time that ratio works out is if you have a straight up Project Mayhem, end of the credit system / end of the world scenario where full on SHTF occurs, Last of Us style, where nobody is in existence any longer to enforce any sort of debts that need to be collected upon, right? That's a very bad bet to take. The odds are definitely in the house's favor, so don't balance that ratio out and find yourself in a very bad hole at some point in time. But with what you have and with what you're currently capable of, those hard assets will only become more valuable over time, especially when they become scarce and when they become necessary to survival or even at the bare minimum, certain levels of comfort or maybe strategic importance during a full-on SHTF scenario. So, for example, here is an EcoFlow River 2 Pro power station. These are nice power units. I'm very fortunate. Full disclosure, EcoFlow sends these power units to me because I work with them and I think they have good products, and then I try to present them to members of this community. Is this expensive? Yes, it's an expensive item. So full disclosure, yeah, I received this for free. I'm very lucky in that regard. However, regardless of what companies you choose or what products you want, the ability to have renewable power during an SHTF scenario will be very sought after, because most members of your community have not thought even twice about getting a standard gas or propane operated generator, let alone a solar capable generator that can be recharged through many life cycles and keep things up and running during a full-on grid down scenario without the need of fuel storage or anything like that, right? So things that produce power are a great asset to have in the sense of value towards your survival, right? We're not talking economics. We're not talking trying to make a profit. We're not talking financial advice. I got to keep saying that because I don't want anyone to get confused here. What we're talking about is that your preps are assets no matter how you look at them, regardless of what happens in the world. But with what is happening right now, you should understand that their value will only go up in the sense of the value that they provide, not economic or financial value. We're not here to discuss that because that doesn't matter if you're using these things for what their intended purpose is, right? So Another great example. Over here, I've got some optics, right? This is Hollow Sun. Got a Vortex Venom over here. Got a Vortex Strike Eagle scope. These are cool optics that I'm checking out, and I'm going to put some reviews out on in the eventual future here because they're relatively budget friendly in the optics genre, right? When it comes to things that could cost up to 3,000 all the way down to 100, there's a middle range road there that all of these kind of sit in comfortably. Yet all of them are made in China. And these things are valuable in the sense of what they provide your capabilities of when it comes to self-defense, or even when it comes to hunting and being able to harvest meat, or whatever else you might need them for. But they will be completely unobtainable if we find ourselves in a trade embargo scenario with a country like China. If we get into a hot conflict with China, these options won't exist anymore. And I can tell you this right now, although made in American optics brands are generally higher quality and have great glass and good durability and everything else, they're also much more expensive. And when that supply can't meet the demand, they'll become even that much more expensive. So having things like this now allows you to get something that's affordable, that still does the job, that you probably won't be able to get at all at a certain point in time if things keep developing in the direction they're going now. Okay, so these are assets that will increase in value because of the fact that you got them at a good price when you were able to, and you no longer can acquire them anymore. And I don't know if I said this before, but I am definitely under the weather. So if I sound weird, like I sound in my head right now, I apologize, but I'm doing the best I can here, okay? Here's something else. Keep in mind, these things are expensive, Magic. I can't just afford this stuff now. What makes you think I can have it during this economic collapse? I totally understand that. Societal collapse, whatever kind of collapse you want to call it, we're living through it right now. I hope you understand this as the start of that in the sense of the public start of it, right? These things all started a long time ago. And we talked about that ad nauseum here on the channel. But now it's publicly begun, where the banks are failing in front of your very eyes, which means there's no more denying that it's a possibility, right? However, we all knew this would happen, but now it's happening publicly, which should tell you it's much worse than it actually is because they wouldn't tell you about it if it wasn't, right? Just keep all that stuff in mind, especially when we're talking about, I don't know, World War III. Here's another thing. Some things can be inexpensive and still provide a huge amount of value and be very useful during a survival situation. Right, you see right here is some military surplus stuff. This is some Czechoslovakian mittens that have a trigger finger on them and they're decently warm. I definitely think they're made to be used in conjunction with some wool glove liners, but in general, pretty glad I have these. I live in North Dakota. Having more options for keeping my hands warm is a good idea, and especially mittens that allow you to use a trigger, not the worst thing to have, no, is it? And I have these Swiss gaiters, which are also military surplus. And what's really nice about these is that they feel very high quality. I haven't tested them out yet, but to have some decent gaiters to throw on to make sure that my feet stay warm and dry during the winters that I experience here is not a bad thing to have. And I think between the two of these, it's like, this is like $20 worth of stuff right here from military surplus. And it's still good to go. Militaries around the world thought that this equipment was good enough for their troops. So it's probably good enough for you. And these things will be worth their weight in gold if an entire supply line shuts down and you can no longer have access to inexpensive gear that'll actually help you in a survival situation. You don't need to be in some kind of a firefight to have the use of gaiters or mittens in a cold or wet environment, right? Yet these military surplus items are durable and they're purpose built for those reasons and they're affordable. Now, are you going to be able to get them if things really fall apart around the world? I don't know. But in a survival situation where people are cold and they need their feet to stay dry, they're not going to be upset if you have some of these on hand, right? The value that these bring to you personally to be able to use them through that situation is huge. So not everything has to be really expensive. And I do need to mention the biggest supporter of this channel is Midway USA. They support what I do in the sense of trying to spread awareness around preparedness, and they also support me in being able to find and acquire more gear to share with the community because honestly, that's a big part of what I try to do here is give you ideas and concepts that work for me in my experience so that it's something you might want to try, right? I can only give you guys what my experience level allows me to. And that's just me being honest. I can't tell you things that I have no experience with. So I'll do my best to never just say, this thing, this, if I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? And you'll see that in the comments section often if I answer someone's questions. I will tell you if I just don't know. People have asked me recently, what's a great thermal scope for a rifle? And my answer is, I haven't used them enough to really give you any recommendations. That's just all there is to it. Okay, so big thank you to Midway USA. Appreciate them for helping me out with what I do here on the channel. Now, listen, some things are really expensive, and some things are that one item that if you need it, you need it, and if you don't, you don't, right? And some things have a lot of application and a lot of practicality that are not in a lot of people's budget range. And that's just the truth. And I don't know how else to say that. It's just legitimately how life works, right? I would love to have a 4x4 rock crawler that could get me out of any situation possible with a 50 cal mounted on top, right? A dune buggy of sorts. But I can't afford it, so I don't have one, right? And that's just how life works. There are some things that should be considered in the sense of if you can afford certain options, they'll bring value, maintain their value, and eventually be very hard to acquire if we find ourselves in a full-on collapse scenario. Now, not all collapse scenario issues regarding supply and demand and just being able to access things are related to the supply chain or the lack thereof supply, right? Some things are just based on the fact that a year ago you could have afforded it and now you can't. When it comes to inflation, when it comes to the value of the dollar, when it comes to your employment or whatever other scenario is involving your personal situation during that time, right? A year ago, I could have afforded more than I can afford now. And that's just real life because of inflation, right? And just because of some of my personal choices when it came to my income. But that can just be the way things work sometimes. So an extremely expensive endeavor is something like night vision. Night vision is very expensive and it is very niche. What do you need it for? Well, there's actually a lot more applications for night vision than just shooting guns with it, right? Because that's like the fun, more popular concept surrounding night vision. But as a prepper, there's a lot more uses for it than just that. However, can you justify the cost of those uses, right? These are things that if you don't have them, you don't have them. But if you do, you might be glad you do. And it is very expensive and very hard for people to enter the market of night vision. I've been working on it for years. Now, I'm a very lucky person, and I know that. I'm very blessed, and I'll never say anything otherwise because I have an extreme amount of gratitude for what this community has provided me with and helped me accomplish in my own personal preparedness goals. And one of those things that I'm very grateful for is that I have a relationship with a company called Nightline Inc. And Nightline is the OEM manufacturer for most of the night vision equipment you see out on the market that's carried by multiple other night vision retailers. And these guys are basically the factory direct version of all that night vision gear. So one thing that's cool about Nightline Inc. is that although all this stuff is very expensive, don't get me wrong, it definitely is. And it definitely has some useful purposes to it. Trust me on that. It's not just about being tactical. However, Nightline Inc., they skip the middleman because they're making the tubes and everything else for all the other companies anyway. So you have a factory direct company that supports channels like this one because they understand the need for citizens to be as prepared as possible for what they perceive being a threat here in the future, which I can't go into more details about that right this second, but I can tell you it's very concerning when you start listening to some of the thought process here going on in the community. But regardless, what's cool about Nightline Inc. is that not only do they have high quality stuff and they provide the OEM products for all these other retailers and manufacturers out there, but Nightline Inc. only sells stuff like through a phone call. So you have to call them, and then obviously they walk you through the process and they make sure you get exactly what you need so you don't waste any money. So that the hard-earned dollars, the thousands of dollars that you spend on this type of equipment goes to exactly what you need rather than just rolling the dice based on what somebody might have in stock, right? And another cool thing is that because they are the direct supplier of all the tubes and everything else that are used in all this other night vision equipment around the industry, well, they are capable of allowing you to choose your tubes to make sure that you have the level of clarity you are looking for. So there's a lot of great things about working with Nightline. I've learned a lot from them so far, and I have a lot more to learn, and there will be some great night vision content coming in the future. This is very expensive stuff, but their website is linked on my website. It's Nightline Inc., so you can just Google it, I'm sure. But if you go through the process and call them up and start trying to place an order, if you just tell them that Magic Preppers sent you, you'll get 15% off right then and there. So that's pretty cool, in my opinion anyway. I mean, I would say that that's a pretty decent discount on something that's that expensive. But regardless, this is so expensive that if you don't have it before an economic crisis, you're definitely not going to have it after. And if you have it during one or after one, it might come in handy, or it might maintain some level of value that you can use it to get yourself into a better situation. The other thing I want to mention, okay, and that all this stuff kind of falls into the same category that I want you to be very aware of, okay, is that this is not assets in the sense of liquid. And when I say that, what I mean is don't count on these things to pay your bills for you after the fact. Now, has that been something I've done in the past? Yeah. When I've been in a tight situation before, I've sold rifles, I've sold handguns, I've made sure I paid my bills and kept moving forward, even though at the time I was struggling financially, right? And it hurt, letting go of some of those guns didn't feel nice, but they were nice to have because I had these assets that were physical that I owned that I could actually turn into cash relatively easily and then keep paying my bills and keep moving forward. So that was a great thing for me to have on hand because it's like saving money, except for you also have this piece of gear that's ready to go in case you need it during a more stressful situation, right? Here's the thing, during a financial collapse, during some kind of Great Depression scenario, although these things might have a lot of monetary value to them, no one's going to be able to afford to buy them from you, especially at a decent price during that time. So keep that in mind because these preps and any other preps you have, the idea really shouldn't be that I can turn this into cash if need be during a financial collapse type situation because who's going to buy it? If no one has any money, then what good does it do for you in that regard? However, having these things in the sense of using them to make your life more efficient, to make yourself more hardened against some of the challenges that are laying before us ahead, and in order to have access to the items that you wouldn't be able to access otherwise, that's really what you should be looking at them in the sense of assets. They're assets to your preparedness. They're assets to your survival. And yes, they can be assets to maybe helping you out financially in a pinch. However, I would not rely on that strategy because if everybody's suffering and you can't afford to buy these things anymore, right? Like I said, a year ago I could have bought more than I can now. Well, if you're in that position at this point, what makes you think anybody else is going to be able to buy them at full price at this point, right? So you're going to lose money if you end up having to do that. And yeah, it might get you through a tight situation, but that's not the strategy that I'd be moving forward with. The strategy I'd be moving forward with is, do I have these things now? Are they going to help me get through a precarious situation? And on the other side of this collapse scenario, will I be glad that I had access to the items I had and that I was able to use them and leverage them towards making sure my life was more comfortable and that I was able to more efficiently survive whatever threats were coming my way? And I think that's how you have to look at it. So, look, things are getting hard. I'm not going to lie to you, right? And I tried to do a good job of giving you a realm of ideas here that are in different price ranges in the sense of the assets we have as preppers, right? Power during an emergency is an asset, okay? Having optics that can allow you to defend yourself or put meat on the table, these are assets, right? Having military surplus gear that's really inexpensive but is purpose built and up to military specifications for durability and still provides basic necessities of keeping your feet warm and dry and keeping your hands warm, right? That's an asset. Night vision, as expensive as it is, allowing you to see in the dark and not give away your position and allowing you to do other things around your property or to scout or do search and rescue without having to use a flashlight. Can that be a huge asset? Of course it can. Can it give you a huge advantage over somebody else who might want to do you harm that doesn't have access to the same type of equipment? Of course it can. Is it extremely expensive? Yes, it is. All these things bring something to the table, right? And they're all in different price ranges. Your best bet is still food, right? And access to potable water. Those things are going to maintain their value no matter what because you will need them no matter what. But everything else is still an asset as well. And the best part of being a prepper is that we have hard, tangible assets at our disposal for use when we need them. And not everybody can say that. And that's the best way to look at this whole collapse situation. We're all in a different situation. Financially, when it comes to our preparedness, right? How many of us have a year's worth of food? How many have 2 weeks worth of food? How many have 3 years worth of food? We're all in a different spot. But we have to look at what we're doing as a benefit, because it is, even if it's financially difficult to achieve sometimes. And right now, things are going to get more and more difficult to achieve financially. I guarantee you that. And it's unfortunate that we're at this point, but here we are. And I wanted to have this conversation because honestly, with everything going on right now, it's kind of difficult to just stew on every individual detail, right? These little details that they keep leaking out into the press every single day. Oh, here you go. Here's another event that occurred, right? A Russian jet hits a American drone. Everybody's freaking out. Really? You think a bunch of militaries flying aircraft in international water isn't going to eventually result in some type of an accident? We've been saying that here on this channel, and I keep saying we because we're a community, not because I think of myself in a strange way. But that has been said on this channel frequently for quite some time. It only takes one little accident, right, for something bigger to happen. We know these things are going to happen. The longer this goes on for, the more these accidents are going to occur. So no one should be surprised. And placing blame is ridiculous too. Whoever's doing whatever, you're both active in that militaristic environment. Things happen, right? Either way, do what you can to be prepared. And don't panic. Don't stress out. I mean, am I stressed? Yeah, a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you not to be stressed, but I'm a little stressed. I think it's reasonable, right? But we shouldn't be. We should be very calm and relaxed because we have assets. We have things that can get us through these dark times, and we have things of value that we might not be able to procure ever again. So keep all that in mind. If you have any questions for me, leave it in the comments below. Just a good conversation I wanted to have with everybody here. I appreciate every single one of you and all your support. If you need anything else from me, you can go to magicprepper.com. It's also where you can get info about Nightline and everything else like that. There's a sponsors and affiliates page on the website that kind of helps you figure all that out. And there's a bunch of discounts and stuff on there too. So in case you're looking to expand on your preps and your assets, that's a good place to go because you can save some money by going through there instead of directly through these manufacturers. So just wanted to mention that. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.